Hey, it's Jade, and welcome to my very first tutorial video. Today we're talking about fundamental tools, tips, and tricks of Photoshop. First, before we get started, I would like to talk about my setup so that if you have any questions about that, at least I covered it in this video. I have a Wacom Cintiq Pro tablet, 13 inches, that's what I draw on digitally, and I have an iMac as my computer. And I also have one of these drawing gloves that I use to make sure that my hand is not getting stuck across the tablet as I draw. It protects your tablet as well as helps you make cleaner lines. So those are the tools I'm using for drawing. And as far as streaming and doing my videos, I use a Blue Yeti mic. So that's the mic you see here with a pop filter. So in case you're wondering those things, I figured I would just share those ahead of the time with you guys. So let's get started. Here we have our Photoshop window. This is what will appear when you first open Photoshop. So what you're gonna wanna do, first things first, is you're gonna wanna hit Create New. And you'll bring up this little document, or this little window here that's called New Document. And all of these tabs have presets for different types of artwork. So if you're doing photos, if you're doing print, art and illustration, web, mobile, film, video, etc. I don't usually listen to these. I usually create my own preset. You can even name your own preset here where it says preset details. You know, if you have something that you're doing all the time, it's good to have a preset. Otherwise, it really doesn't take that long to just make your own. For this example, let's just do a web-based drawing. Something you can do when you are setting up your document is you can change the units here. You can change it to be pixels, inches, centimeters, millimeters, points, and picas. For web-based projects, I generally use pixels. For print projects, I use inches. To each their own, use it however you want. You can always change it later. The width and height you can change to be whatever you want. Now say for example you have a rectangular shape and not a square, you can change the orientation of it. It'll adjust the width and height accordingly. So if you accidentally entered it in the wrong box and you're not sure which is supposed to be the longer side, don't worry about it. Just click either landscape or portrait orientation and it'll set it for you, depending on whichever one you click. So I'm gonna do a square. The resolution is gonna be set to 300 and you don't need to mess with pixels per inch. Just don't mess with that. And the color mode for web-based projects are gonna be RGB color. So if you were doing a print-based project, you'd wanna set it to CMYK color. But for this case, we're gonna do RGB color. It's very important that you pay attention to the color mode because this can hurt you later. And just be a pain to have to change. So for example, if you're working in RGB and you're trying to do something for web, but you accidentally set your document to CMYK and you go and you save the file ready to go put it on the web, but all your colors look all washed out and you're like, well, that's not what it looked like in Photoshop. Why does it look like this in the JPEG? Well, that's probably because you set the color mode to CMYK. So when you're looking at things on your computer, make sure that it's set to RGB, and if you're printing things out, it needs to be CMYK. So that's a good little tip there for you. Alright, as far as background contents, I always leave this to white because this can be changed later at any time. So those are all the preset details. There's advanced options, but we're not going to go over those in this tutorial. This is going to be very basic stuff. So you hit create, and this is the window that pops up. Something to note is that everybody's Photoshop workspace is going to look different. You can customize this to however you want it. That should probably be its own tutorial, honestly, customizing the way it looks. But I can recommend that if you like to draw in Photoshop, this is a really nice layout to have because you have your colors right here, you have your layers available, and your properties and brushes right here ready to grab them if you need them. I'm going to go over the basic tools and functions of Photoshop before I get started drawing, just to cover my bases so that you know what I'm talking about while I'm drawing. Feel free to skip ahead to whatever you need. I'll probably leave a key in the description below when I go over specific topics so that you can skip through the video with what you need to know. To use the zoom tool, you select the magnifying glass and you can use the following hotkeys: Command or Control plus and minus, minus to zoom out, and plus to zoom in. Or using your mouse, you can click and drag in and out in order to zoom in and out. Let's go over layers. First thing I could say is that this background layer can be very frustrating if you accidentally start to draw on it without creating a layer. So generally what I do is I turn this lock off and I create a layer on top of it just so that that background layer isn't an issue ever. To add a layer, you're gonna go right here to the plus sign, and that's create a new layer. Say you're like, whoops, I actually didn't mean to do that. There's a little trash can where you can delete the layer here, and you can actually check this so that it doesn't show that little window again if that gets annoying to you. I always just do it just in case I accidentally didn't mean to do that and don't want to delete the layer. So I actually would encourage leaving that on. So now you'll see that in the layers section, you have this little checkered icon, or this checkered window, and a white window. The checkered means that there's nothing on that layer right now. So checkered means it's like a blank background. So when you draw on that layer with the checkers, you'll notice, let me zoom in a little bit. You'll notice that something will appear in the little window. So that's kind of nifty to know where you're at. Another trick and tip I have when you're drawing in Photoshop or doing anything in Photoshop, say you draw a circle here and you know, you're done with that and you want to go do something else with that circle, but you make your new layer and you accidentally move the circle, but you meant to like do something on the other layer. It's always a good rule of thumb to lock your layers when you're done with them or not currently using them so that you can't, there's nothing you can do on them to mess it up. And it won't even like, it'll give you this little no icon so that you don't accidentally try to be working on it. And you can always unlock it by clicking the lock, either on the layer or on the lock at the top. So okay, we've added our layer, we know how to add a layer, we know how to delete a layer. Well, how about drawing on a layer? What can we do and how can we draw on a layer that's efficient? The brush tool is over here. It just literally looks like a brush, or there are other tools you can use to do that as well, with the pencil tool, which I never use, so I can't really explain what it does differently, but I always use the brush tool, and I'm pretty sure most people who use Photoshop use the brush tool. You also have the paint bucket tool where you can paint the canvas or spaces that are enclosed in using the paint bucket tool. So say for example, you draw a circle and you want to paint the inside of this that color. Something else, maybe fellow artists out there can help me with this. I don't know how to get rid of the little white line that shows up when you fill in spaces. I cannot seem to get rid of that other than painting over it, which it just bothers me. I don't know if it really necessarily shows up except on digital. I know it won't show up on print, but it'll show up on digital, so it's kind of frustrating. So if anyone has any tips on how to get rid of this little line that appears when you fill in things, I would love to know your tips. Anyway, so say you have done that, but you're like, shoot, I gotta erase this. This little icon right here is how you do that. You can click that and you can adjust the size of your eraser up here. And you can do this for brushes as well. This little thing, this preview window, you can drop down here and you can adjust the size, the hardness, meaning how fuzzy it is. If you go to 0, it's very fuzzy. If it's 100, it's like a hard line. So I'll show the example of both of those. So if I want to erase, you just have the eraser selected and you use just like a brush tool. Go right over it. But if I want it to look fuzzy, I go back up here, turn the hardness all the way down. There it is. It's like a nice blend. Another thing you can do to adjust brush sizes, including eraser, for your eraser or the brush, you can use, I know this is a hotkey thing, but it's just something that's really easy. Instead of going up here and changing it, no matter if you're on Mac or PC, you can use the bracket key. Make the size of your brush bigger and smaller. So the right one makes it bigger and the left bracket makes it smaller. Another thing you can do is you can toggle the caps lock key to make the outline of the brush go away or come back. So if you ever like that on, you like having the brush outlined and you're like, well shoot, I can't find it and I can't figure out how to get it back, check to make sure your caps lock is not on. So we know how to draw, we know how to erase. Well, what if you've drawn this really amazing thing, I know we've just drawn a circle in this example, but what if you've drawn something that's taking a lot of time and, you know, it's a face maybe that has proportions and things that just you don't want to have to redraw or erase and start over. Well, the amazing thing about Photoshop is you can transform things you've drawn. So, for example, say I drew this circle and I'm like, well, shoot, I don't feel like redrawing this circle, but I want it to be an oval instead. The cool thing you can do is you can go up to Edit, Free Transform, and this little box will pop up, and Photoshop will allow you to literally resize however you want. So automatically, if you try to grab any parts of it and resize it, it's going to do it as a square. It's going to do it and keep the proportions the same. If you don't want to do that and you want to say make it an oval and squish it, you have to hit Shift and then drag, and it'll make it into an oval, which is great. So to accept that transformation, you have to hit Enter or Return, and there you go. You resized it and made the circle look, you know, more flatter or bigger, or, you know, you changed it to maybe go diagonal or whatever. You can do it. Next, let's talk about opacities. You have a lot of different things that you can do in Photoshop with opacities. You can adjust opacity by the layer level, like so. Or you can do it by the brush level. So for example, I want to put another circle on top of this, but at 50% opacity. Go up to the top here, you can type it in. Or you can use the drop down to use the slider bar. Then you just take your brush and you draw right on top. And the cool thing is you can layer things like so, and keep adding on top. It's a nice way to do blending if you don't want to constantly change the color of your brush. Next, we're going to talk about the selection tool, specifically the magic wand. It's this little icon right here that literally looks like a magic wand. I use this often when I'm selecting spaces inside of lines that I've colored. For example, I have these two circles here that I've outlined with a black pen. So what you would do is you'd click the wand tool and you click inside the space that you want to color. So for in this case, I want to change the inside of this color to be green. I'm on the wrong layer, so I need to make sure that I either make a new layer or go back to the original layer. And I'm going to use the paint bucket tool to simply paste inside. To deselect the circle, you can press Command or Control D on your keypad, or you can select Deselect in the dropdown. Say, for example, I like this shape as a whole, but I don't want to have to re-outline the entire shape. What I can do is lock transparent pixels with this icon right here. Then this will allow me to paint inside the already drawn pixels without going outside of the lines. The text tool down here, where you can simply tap or click and it will create this box for you. This one I need to adjust the size because it's a very small artboard. And I'm going to use the selection tool or the move tool and move this around so that you can see. In order to change the color of text, you actually have to have the text tool selected. And up here in this little window, since it's gray, it's hard to see, there's a little window here, and that's where you can change the color of text. Make sure you hit OK to confirm. And with the text tool selected, you can also change the size of the font or the typeface altogether. Now, on default, the text tool will give you lorem ipsum or placeholder text, but to use the type of text you want, say you want to write example, you would select it with the text tool selected, say example, and there you go. Make sure you don't hit any keys while this is selected. You should select or click off of it using another tool of some sort just to get it deselected, and then you can go about pressing the keys on your keyboard again. And something we haven't gone over is brushes, actually. We need to go over brushes. So with my brush tool selected, you can go over to the drop down here to go through brushes, or in this case, I have it over here. Now, the brushes you have available to you will be different. You can download brushes into Photoshop and you can buy brush packs and stuff like that. I can't remember if Kyle's brushes were already here or if I downloaded them from somewhere else, but just know that you can add more custom brushes, which is great. So let me just show you a few examples of different brushes and how they interact on the artboard. This one is an oil pastel. It looks like this. And you see that judging on which brush you're using, you have all these customizations up here that will differ between which brush you're using. For example, on this one, you can only adjust the opacity and the flow and smoothing and angle of the brush. When I work, I typically use Kyle's Manga Edge to outline my line work. And when sketching, I use Kyle's Drawing Box HB Pencil Pro 15 pixels. Something really cool about Photoshop to know is that you don't necessarily have to sketch in Photoshop. You can import photos into Photoshop of traditional sketches you've done and ink them in Photoshop. After going to File, Open in Photoshop, select your photo of your choice, hit Open, and your sketch should appear in Photoshop. Then select the movement tool, grab your photo, and click and drag it into the other tab where your artboard is. Use the movement tool to resize your photo and to position it on the artboard. Once you have a size and position that you like, hit Enter to confirm the selection. Now that you have your photo imported, you can also adjust the opacity of your sketch. If you draw right on the layer that you just adjusted the opacity, your brush will not look correct. Add another layer and be able to draw right on top of your sketch. Now that I've showed you the basic tools that you can use in Photoshop, let's actually put them to use and draw a character. As I'm drawing the character, I will try to explain as best as I can what I'm doing so that you can follow along using the skills you just learned. First, I'll start by drawing the sketch in a lighter brush color. This helps avoid any distractions while I'm drawing. You can always change the color of your sketch by using the Lock Transparent Pixels tool. And then simply use the paint bucket to paste over top to change the color of your sketch. Here you'll notice that I'm using a combination of the brush tool, eraser tool, and the lasso tool, which is also another selection tool to adjust my sketch. The lasso tool is up in the top left of the tool panel and looks like a lasso. You can use it to select specific areas that you would like to make adjustments to. Like here, I wanted to make the mouth a bit smaller. When you have your object selected with the lasso tool, you can use Command T or Control T to resize and shape your object. Here you can see that I use the lasso tool to resize and shape the hair. I went around the hair and make sure that you make an enclosed space in order to grab what you want with the lasso tool. Then you can press delete if you'd simply like to delete the entire selection. Here I use the lasso tool again to simply move the eye in further. A friendly reminder to save your work often when you're working in Photoshop. If you feel like it's been about 5 minutes, always remember to save. I'm an avid saver because it would really be a shame to lose all that work. Here you'll notice that I've switched brushes. This is my inking tool that I use when outlining all of my characters. If you're new to digital art or have shaky hands like I do, a pro tip is to set the smoothing to 30%. It's in the top panel in the toolbar. The smoothing setting will allow you to complete nice, clean lines without any shake. Here I'm using the magic wand tool to fill in my completed line work. Remember to always make sure your line work is a complete section, meaning if you have any sections where the line does not connect, this function will not work and you'll simply paste a bunch of color all over your canvas. During this stage of my drawing, I'll usually create a base layer for all the color. Or if I'm working in really complex pieces, I will create a base color for each individual section of the character. Say, for example, the hair, the skin, the t-shirt, the eyes would all get their own layer. Now that I've finished adding the base color to all of my character, I now create something called clipping masks, which you can see here if you click the 3 lines and go down to clipping mask. Clipping masks are used to contain all of your paint onto one specific layer. In this case, I have the base layer where there's color already laid down. So there are pixels there. In order to keep my shading on top of those pixels that I want it to appear on, I use a clipping mask to do so. What this will do is allow me to paint inside the entire character, but not going outside of the lines. When I was talking earlier about doing more complex layers, what you would do is you would make a layer for the hair, for the skin, and for the shirt, for example. That way that when I paint on a clipping mask for the hair, it will only paint in the hair. But in this case, I had to be very careful not to paint on the skin or the shirt. If you get really far into a drawing and realize that you should have made more complex layers, what you can do is use the magic wand tool. What I do here is I realize that I should have created separate layers for different components of the character. So what I did was, using the base layer, while it's selected, I use the magic wand tool to select the area that I want to start adding shadows to. In this case, it was the hair. With the clipping mask layer selected, then I can paint on top of the hair, adding shadows without having to worry about going in the skin or the shirt area. After you've finished your drawing in Photoshop, there are many ways that you can save it. In this case, I want to save it as a JPEG. In order to do that, I'll go to File, Save As. By default, Photoshop will be selected. In the drop-down, select JPEG. Don't worry about any of these extra settings. Hit Save. After you hit save, this little window will pop up called JPEG Options. Depending on what you're saving it for, you might want to adjust the quality to a lower setting or a higher setting. In this case, I'm going to leave it to maximum. Don't worry about the format options. Hit OK. I hope you found this video helpful. If so, leave a like and subscribe. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And always remember to stay inspired and keep creating. Bye guys!